Good afternoon. I'm very pleased to, I guess it's morning, very pleased to welcome everyone to the Miller Center's third annual James C. Lehrer Lecture. I'm Steve Burns. I'm chair of the governing council here, and I'd like to give a very warm welcome to our fellow council members. This event kicks off our spring meeting every year. Jim is best known for being one of America's leading journalists as the founder and anchor of the PBS NewsHour. He was also an author, playwright, and screenwriter. Throughout his lifetime, Jim moderated an impressive 12 presidential debates and covered every presidency from JFK to Barack Obama. We were very lucky to have Jim as a colleague here at the Miller Center, serving as a member of our governing council from 2016 until his untimely death in 2020. It just so happens that Jim and I were elected to the council at the same meeting. We were standing together outside of the conference room waiting for the results of the vote. And I was thinking to myself, I must be a shoo-in. I wonder what this guy's chances are. In any event, we were both elected. In any event, we were both elected. Over the next 4 years, I grew to know how much Jim loved the Miller Center and his association with what we do and who we are. He was always challenging us to have high standards and was not afraid to speak his mind. But he had a way of making everyone around him feel comfortable. As we'll hear today in a short video honoring Jim, he created a moral ecology in the newsroom and was firmly devoted to allowing the facts of the news to speak for themselves. On behalf of the Miller Center, I want to thank Fred Scott and Karen Turner, Jean and Ann Fife, and the late Alice Handy and her husband Peter, who asked Mary and I to join them in honoring Jim through this lectureship. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that Alice Handy passed away unexpectedly roughly a year ago. I served as vice chair under her and succeeded her as chair. She was a great role model and mentor to many people in many walks of life, notoriously bright and extremely warm once you got to know her. The positive impact Alice had on the Miller Center cannot be overstated, and I hope she is watching us now. Thanks to Peter, if he's out here somewhere, I hope he is, but maybe not, for representing the family. The idea for the lecture endowment was hatched by Fred Scott and Alice, in the car on the way home from Jim's funeral in Washington. Fred brought Jim to the Miller Center and became close friends with Jim and Kate over the years. I would also like to thank Jim's widow, Kate Lehrer, for her generous financial support of the event. No one asked Kate to do this. She just did it on her own because that's what she's like. I would also like to give a very warm welcome to her 3 daughters, Amanda, Jamie, and Lucy, who are all with us today. Maybe you guys could give us a little wave so we know who you are. And now turning to today's conversation. We are honored to host Lisa Desjardins, PBS NewsHour Capitol Hill correspondent, as our featured speaker for this year's lecture. Lisa is the 3rd guest in this lecture series. She was preceded in 2022 by Judy Woodruff, the former anchor and managing editor of the PBS NewsHour, and in 2023 by David Brooks. Thanks to Judy, we've been lucky to enjoy an enduring partnership with the NewsHour through this lectureship. Before joining PBS, Lisa spent nearly 10 years with CNN as senior correspondent and Capitol Hill reporter. Prior to CNN, she reported for the Associated Press, Reuters, the Sun News, and 3 television news programs. Lisa has received several journalism awards, including 2 George Foster Peabody Awards, the Radio and Television Correspondents Association Joan S. Barone Award, and the National Press Foundation's Everett McKinley Dirksen Award for Distinguished Reporting of Congress. Lisa holds a BA from the College of William & Mary and a master's from Northwestern's Medill School of Journalism. She also received a first-level graduate degree in Russian Studies from the Herzl State Pedagogical University of Russia. Perhaps more importantly, Lisa, like Jim, is ruthlessly fair-minded, balanced, hardworking, and endlessly pursues the news in what is likely the most complex institution in government, Congress. For NewsHour junkies, my wife and I included, you know that Lisa has been an essential resource during a complicated and turbulent time in Congress and in our politics more widely. If you followed her during the pandemic, you also came to know her cat, Rocky, who often appeared with her on screen in the background. It's usually lying on top of your couch in the back. Yeah. So, Finally, I'm also happy to introduce Bill Antolis, Director and CEO of the Miller Center, who will moderate today's conversation. Bill is known to everyone in this room, and you have his bio in your programs. For those watching online, Bill asks that you look him up on the Miller Center website. Once you get there, however, skip his bio and treat yourself to our fantastic website, which is a real treasure. We have over 5 million unique visits per year. Putting in a plug for the old website. So, Bill shares with Lisa a love for President Chester Arthur, which they will discuss in a few minutes. I'm not making this up. That is a Miller Center special right there. So, before I turn it over to Bill and Lisa, we'd like to play a brief film honoring Jim's legacy, and then after the film, we'll get started with today's conversation. Enjoy, and thanks again for all of you being with us.
Good evening, I'm Jim Lehrer. On the NewsHour tonight, the news of this Friday. So being on television, particularly on live television as I was for as long as I was, it was every evening, it was a kind of up experience. And
adrenaline?
Adrenaline. And,
butterflies every night?
Every night, because the potential for making an ass of myself on national television confronted me every moment. Not only not to embarrass yourself, but also the pressure to get it right and to try to make sure that you've got all the bases covered, that you've treated somebody fairly.
It's funny to think now, but I guess did they publicize the
Yes.
route?
Oh, sure.
Oh, yeah. Oh, it was
I wrote
very...
the story with the route, the one that Oswald had in his possession.
It came out the afternoon before, didn't it?
That's right. That's right. It was found in his effects. It was my story. It was on the front page of the Dallas Times-Herald.
And we'd only been in Washington a month, I think. We heard that in 3 days, PBS was going to get chopped. And then Watergate broke the morning you heard that, I think. After that,
It was over.
PBS was just forgotten. So when we saw Watergate, it was like, heaven.
Saved by some thugs.
Yes.
But the irony, of course, the great irony was, we then later broadcast the Watergate hearings, and that saved PBS.
Yeah.
I got a call from George H.W. Bush right after he'd left the White House. And he said, Jim, I need a favor. Yes, sir. What is it? He said, well, we're going to have a little roundtable discussion in Colorado Springs about the Cold War. And I'd like for you to moderate it. And I said, oh, Mr. President, it's a deal. But I said, to my credit, I said, I'm going to take a dime for this. And then quick follow-up involves Kate and me. He called me again a few months later, or a year later, I don't know. He said, look, I want to do the same thing for Asia. And I said, well, sure, Mr. President, in for a nickel, in for a dollar, no deal, no big deal. Still no pay, though. And he said, fine. And so we agreed to do it, all set to go. Then I get a call from his office saying, could you come a day early for a dinner with President and Mrs. Bush? And I reluctantly say yes, thinking it's going to be another dinner and all that. We go downstairs, and standing there waiting for us are George and Barbara Bush. And there's a couple of Secret Service agents, and they put us in a car. And the four of us, just the four of us, have dinner at an Italian restaurant. The Secret Service cleaned out the restaurant so we could do it. And we talked for 2 hours. Everything was off the record. It was great fun. It was a magic experience, you know. And I realized what he had done. I wouldn't take money. So it was the best way.
That was your honorarium.
That was the honorarium, which was worth all. And
Priceless.
Thoughtful man, though. Somebody owning a George H.W. Bush would think in those terms. There are very few nights that I left to go home to my adoring wife and not feeling good, at least about what we tried to do. Doesn't mean we always pulled it off. Sometimes we had the wrong people on the wrong story on the wrong night. But as a general rule, I always felt good about what we tried to do. And there were some times when I felt, I was so happy.
Before you start, may I just say what an incredible honor this is. I mean, for me to be here as part of Jim Lehrer's legacy, the person who meant, I think it's fair to say, more than anyone in my career, in my decision to go to the NewsHour in the first place, staying there over 10 years and then coming back, and I've been back 15 years. It's just an honor beyond the words that I have the capacity to say. And I want to thank the Miller Center, thank you, Bill. I want to thank the university, Duke background notwithstanding, and especially to thank Kate and your amazing family. So I'm just overwhelmed. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Moral ecology is a standard and a way of doing things. And so at the NewsHour, it was just that you're not going to be crass. Frankly, we're not going to be cable. We're not going to do horse race. We're not going to be unfair. We are going to be, we're going to be one notch above TV. And it really mattered a lot to me that Robin and Jim were writers. Because it's very easy to slip into a very shallow, no offense to my friends in TV, but to slip into that news hit of the moment that nobody will remember the next day. And because I think Jim and Robin had a literary sensibility, we were going to deal with an issue that you would remember. That was an important issue. That was a lingering issue, not the issue blip of the moment.
It's really great to be here with everyone. Thank you all for coming, Steve. Thanks for that terrific introduction. My big thanks to the Lehrer family for being here and the other supporters of the Lehrer Lectureship. This is really a very special thing that we get to do every year, and it ends our programming year. We do have one more event. I think next Thursday or Friday, the 10th, we have an event. But typically this is the sort of season finale, and it happens at the same time, as Steve mentioned, with our Governing Council meeting. So a big welcome to our Governing Council members who are here completely surrounding us, it turns out. They're looking over my shoulder now at this point. Really great to have you, and a big thanks to Steve for chairing our council the last 4 years. This is his last meeting as chair, and we're really appreciative. So a big round of applause for Steve. He's been just terrific. And Lisa, thank you. Thanks for joining us. It's really a great honor to have you. You've got a lot of not just NewsHour junkies, but fans of Rocky in the room, as well as fans of yours.
He doesn't like a car ride, or else he would have come.
He'd be welcome on stage. We have somebody else instead here that we'll get to in a second. But please bring Rocky as well as your family next time you come. And we're just thrilled, including because you've been reporting on an incredibly important and tumultuous time, and we're going to get into that in a bit. But thanks for coming. And I just wanted to start by seeing, you heard Judy and David talk about Jim. He's been such a big part of us. You joined the NewsHour after he'd stepped down, but I know he'd been around for a while. So just any remembrances you'd like to share?
That's right. Well, first of all, if Judy Woodruff was overwhelmed by this honor, you can only imagine how I feel, following in her footsteps as well. I mean, I really am walking in the path of my journalism gods to me, and at the top of that mountain is Jim Lehrer. I grew up with the NewsHour on the McNeil Lehrer NewsHour on my mom's small little kitchen television as she was cooking. From the time I could recognize the world, that was some of the first images that I remember, was of watching the show and watching him. And the standards for journalism that he set, I cannot tell you how important they are today. When journalism is tested, each one of us feels it. I know you feel it as viewers, but as reporters, we feel it constantly, the push for us to try and bend to pressure from one side or the other, and often all sides. Jim Lehrer, the DNA that he had and that he injected into journalism is what keeps us strong and able to stay straight and to stay focused and to keep asking for the facts and to not be pressured. And it is just a remarkable legacy that goes beyond our show, but really has, I think, helped the country and helped politicians on Capitol Hill keep their mooring as much as they could. And I also, of course, would be remiss to say thank you so much for that incredible introduction, Steve. Thank you for recognition of Rocky. He appreciates it very much. And thank you to you for inviting me. This really is a tremendous honor personally to me. I am a William & Mary, proud William & Mary graduate. I have to stick up for Williamsburg. But of course, as a Virginian, a very proud Virginian, I also am very proud of UVA and all of the good that it has done in the world and how it addresses its own history. And thanks to the Lehrer family, to Kate, Jim's legacy, of course, is your legacy. The work and support that you brought to him and to journalism matters, and I am personally grateful as a mother to all that you have done as well. So thank you.
Thank you for all of that, Lisa. I so want to jump right into the
let's
crazy
do it.
politics that you're covering, but
Let's do it.
we have to start with Chester.
Oh, can we? Okay, excellent.
So if you've been in my office, you know that I have a bobblehead collection. And the first question Lisa asked when we had our prep Zoom is, do you have Chester Arthur? And I didn't.
You did
but
not.
I do now, and so do
Thankfully,
you.
yes.
So why Chester Arthur? Why does he speak to this moment? A one-term president who was not elected. Garfield is shot less than 3 months in office,
Correct.
I think. He dies a couple months later.
Correct.
Who cares about this guy? Why do we care about this guy?
Anyone from NewsHour who is watching this feed is bracing themselves because they know that I can spend a long time talking about Chester Arthur. So this is a good test of my ability to condense in a live capacity. I will tell you this, there are many fascinating attributes of Chester Arthur, but I think at the very top is the fact that he completely defied expectations. And he showed that someone whose entire foundation was based on a politically corrupt system, which is what he came up with. He came through the kind of party corrupt system at the time in America where there were many forks in the road for us, one of course, being the Civil War. But at the same time, in our democracy, jobs were being given out basically by political party. You were paying to be the postmaster. You were paying to get jobs in government. That was the road to a corrupt system, which we've seen many countries have had a hard time shaking as they're developing. He came up through that system. He was added to the Garfield ticket so that all the political cronies would somehow have a stake in the Garfield presidency. Nobody wanted him to be president. Nobody expected him to be president. He was a man who was a great dresser and a good glad-hander. And when Garfield died, a lot of folks thought the conquering political machine would rule Washington. And the reform that Garfield pushed for, he was sort of a lightning reformer, Garfield. When he died, the anti-reformers, victory. No, Chester Arthur defied them all, and he broke with his political machine. He broke with the folks who fed him, and he ended up pushing through probably the most important meritocracy reform in American history.
The Pendleton Act.
The Pendleton Act. Also the Steel Navy, also, as a lawyer, he was someone who, this is where you need to stop me, but as a lawyer,
I mean, you're walking about a president that we love, right?
as a young attorney in the time that this building was built in the 1850s, he took on a case of a young woman named Elizabeth Jennings in New York City, African-American woman who had been told she could not sit on a New York City streetcar. She was pushed off that car. He took the case. He was a brand new lawyer, and that case and his work on it led to the desegregation of public transit in New York City, Chester Arthur. So that's just a start. He wasn't perfect. There's also flaws, but
We actually,
yeah.
we have a feature on that
Yeah.
story, and we didn't
Good.
set you up for this in the last issue of Illumination. We have a whole feature on the Jennings story. So thank you for all of that. All right, let's go.
Thank you
right
for
to the-
asking,
I
Chester.
mean, and who doesn't want a Chester Arthur
Yay.
bobblehead doll?
Historians out there, give him points on the survey. Move him up. Move him up.
And we all need sideburns like that.
Yeah. Jim Lehrer would have looked good, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's go.
So you get a break today from Congress.
Yes. Yes.
There's been nothing going on up there. It's not all that interesting.
No, if only it was busy.
I want to dial back a little bit because the last couple years have been, let's just say, eventful. You're in the Capitol on
Right.
January 6th.
Yes.
Between then and now, we've seen weeks of trying to elect a speaker getting elected, a speaker getting deposed, another speaker who appears next week to be facing a motion to vacate, essentially a no confidence vote by someone in his own party. What the hell is going on, and how do you cover it?
Simple. Well, there are many directions I could go in answering that question. I think it's important to understand that you know, and the Miller Center knows, that there is deep partisanship in this country and that that's been growing. We see that in our presidential politics. We see it in the price of our presidential politics, both on our culture and the dollar price on presidential politics. But I think that when I look at the Capitol, I see something else beyond the Republican versus Democrats. And I especially see it in the House, which I think has been driving sort of a lot of the coverage and the decision making. It's a tribal and faction-driven place. It's not just about parties. Within the Republican Party in particular, there are different tribes which are warring with each other and have been warring with each other. Part of that has to do with President Donald Trump, and former President Donald Trump, of course, that he has tried to become sort of a one-man Republican Party, and there hasn't been a lot of room for discussion of other ideas, other leaders. There has been a leadership vacuum, I think, for some time that predates Trump in general. But I think the kind of question of what is the Republican Party, the question of which is related, what is the American identity, is something that has been difficult for House Republicans. And so they've divided into factions over it. They're all fighting for power, and some of them are fighting for their policy views.
Is it as bad as it seems?
I don't know. How bad does it seem?
Seems kind of bad, right?
It doesn't seem great. It's not great. I will think, and this is why this building in the 1850s I actually think about a lot. The entire 19th century I think about a lot. You can't help but think about that at the Capitol. But I am an optimist, so understand there are people with different views, probably many of you in this room. I do not think it is as bad as I see Americans responding to in polls. I think that the pendulum swings, and I think it swings back. Now it's got to start swinging back toward more normalcy, I guess is a word that I would use. And I will say that we saw that in the past month when we saw a Democratic president work with a new Republican speaker, work with all four corners of the Capitol, Republicans and Democrats, the leaders, passing a major supplemental bill to aid allies. Now, there is a very justified debate over that, but we saw large majorities in Congress that agreed on something find a way to pass that. And that had been the problem, was that even if Congress was agreeing with itself, there were factions that were able to block it for a number of reasons. So I think that this last month has been a return to a more classic kind of congressional debate and functioning, but it could be short-lived, yes.
Tell us a little bit about that transaction. And after that, maybe we can talk about how this president deals with Congress and how that compares to other presidents. But you know, one indicator of why people might think it is so bad up there is back in October when Hamas did the terrible attacks in Israel. At that point, Congress still didn't have a speaker. It took several weeks to do it. The president was then calling for aid, and even in the middle of all this, Congress couldn't sort of get itself.
That's right.
It's 8 months later before they actually
Right.
passed the supplemental. What happened in those 8 months? What did President Biden do? How did the speaker manage it? What are we not seeing that allowed that to happen?
I think President Biden, for one, stepped back publicly, did not push too hard, I think, to make this is the Biden agenda, although he and Kevin McCarthy clearly crafted sort of the idea of this, what ended up being the ultimate foreign aid package. I think he left room for there to be more oxygen because they knew that they were going to need the new Republican speaker to help them get this through. And then I think what they did was, and I know what they did from reporting, was that the Democrats tried to give room for Mike Johnson to find some stable ground, and they crossed their fingers that he wanted to find that stable ground because they weren't sure. And to be honest, Mike Johnson, who I've known since he entered Congress, and who was on our show, by the way, as our Republican guest during many of the Trump impeachment trials. So he's someone that he's been on NewsHour's radar for a while. I think he was not a tested leader. He had not been in a leadership role yet. And it's very easy when you're outside of leadership. It's easy, as you all said, when you're not president, to make promises or to, wave a big stick. But when you get in office, people can change and their opinions can change. And everyone around the Capitol, McConnell, the leaders, the three leaders, were hoping that Johnson, in fact, was able to get more on their page in terms of stability. And I think he did, in fact, want to. It was a question of threading a very thin needle to make sure that he could do that without losing his job. And remarkably, he figured out how. And the way he did it, and for months and months, everyone thought this was a terrible idea. He was indecisive. He was meeting with everyone. He did not have one group of advisors, unlike Kevin McCarthy, who had a handful of sort of close advisors. Johnson would meet with anyone about anything. He was constantly talking to people, but he wasn't making decisions, and then that was a problem for his conference. In the end, though, it made everyone believe that at least he was genuine, at least he was listening to them, which they didn't feel with McCarthy. There was not trust there. There is a sense that Mike Johnson, when he says something to you in private, he will follow up in public. So, for example, Marjorie Taylor Greene was pressuring him to promise not to hold a vote on the Ukraine funding. And she, at that moment, had so much leverage over him because she was saying, or I will vote to oust you. And at that moment, it felt like she would succeed. But behind closed doors, my reporting is, and I think she said in public, he would not make her that promise. He wouldn't even, he said, I'm not going to make any promises. That was a brave move. And I think in the end, the trust factor and the messaging from his team has been good, which is, we have a 1-seat majority. We can't, give us a chance. Do you want to lose that majority? Because that's what's on the line for Republicans as well. So I think he's played it very smartly and slowly. It's a case of the tortoise beating the hare. Kevin McCarthy, much more like a jackrabbit. Mike Johnson, much more like the tortoise. And so far, he's managed to get out of a very difficult situation.
So in order to get elected, Kevin McCarthy accepts this set of rules that essentially gives the Marjorie Taylor Greenes and that wing of the party, small but very vocal wing of the party, huge power,
right?
It seems, but now it looks like Democrats, when she pulls the motion to vacate,
right,
some number of Democrats are going to support Mike Johnson to stay in. What is going on? Is this coalition government? How would you describe what actually rules the House of Representatives these days.
Well, I'm glad there are students here today because you guys can coin the term for what the heck this government is. It's not exactly a coalition government, right? It's a sort of survival government, maybe. You know, we need to get through these few months until the election without having another ouster of a speaker. And for Democrats, we don't want someone who is unpredictable, you know, and who, you know, could change directions from a phone call from former President Trump. We think Mike Johnson's someone we can work with. They don't want him as speaker. So I think they're gonna, the way Democrats would put this is they're not supporting Mike Johnson, but rather they're opposing the effort to change the speaker right now. So I think maybe a survival government. I think this is one of the few instances where we would see Democrats work with Republicans in this way. By the way, Democrats going into the day when Kevin McCarthy was in fact ousted, that night before and that morning, it was not clear what Democrats would do. They really had misgivings about the idea of throwing out a speaker this way, and they knew that the votes were close, and it really seemed that just you needed maybe 9 Democrats to move, and a lot of the moderate, it felt very possible, and I think Kevin McCarthy thought they were going to stick with him, but he went on air that night before and just unleashed a tirade against Democrats in an effort to win over his base. That was one of the sharpest examples of rhetoric that we'd heard from him. And that infuriated Democrats. Some, like Virginia's Abigail Spanberger, said, no, we cannot work with this guy. You know, that's it. And they had an incredibly fiery meeting. I remember getting texts from Democrats in that meeting, and I'm passing on my reporting on Twitter and then telling my Republican McCarthy sources, you've got a problem. And they're like, no, Democrats, no, they won't oust the speaker. And I was like, I think they will. So it is the frustration for someone like me, and maybe some of our viewers too, is that I love covering policy. I think it is sexy. I think the debates are exciting. I love it. But the truth is that in Washington right now, the tone is what's driving everything. And so it really is Kevin McCarthy's tone as much as anything.
The taunting.
Yeah, the taunting, the way he was seen as duplicitous, all of that cost him. Mike Johnson's tone of maybe a little boring, maybe a little, not so loud, kind of a Boy Scout, like the kind of that quiet but trustworthy tone has gotten him to this moment.
You'd mentioned President Trump before, and in advance of this, when we got together and you were admiring my bobbleheads, yes. You did say something about President Trump as actually being effective in working Congress. How did you find him to be effective as a president in working Congress? And
viewers might be screaming this too. I do want to mention that Mike Johnson obviously is a very conservative person, so we're going to see what's ahead. I'm not saying that he's a moderate. He's very conservative.
Modest personality, conservative.
That's what exactly. In terms of former President Trump, and I was our Trump campaign reporter in 2016, I'm our Trump campaign reporter now. So I spend a lot of time talking with Trump sources as well. Donald Trump, his love of being heard, let's say, his love of speaking words, is something that really served him well, right? In Congress, because he loves the phone call, he loves checking in with people, he loves the glad handing, and he loves being around people who think they are important, and he likes seeming more important than they are. And so what evolved in the Trump presidency was a system where many Republicans had his cell phone number, or the direct line to aides right outside of his office. Now, he doesn't always answer his cell phone, of course. There are many. I just talked to a Freedom Caucus member 2 days ago who left him a message on his cell phone. The direct line for these members of Congress who otherwise felt like they were stuck in gridlock and could not get anything done, the direct line to a Republican president was something that was unheard of. And it was something that he really worked well. It was a two-way benefit for him. One, he got directly from members the dynamics of the push and pull of that factionalism that was going on in the Republican parties, and then he pushed sometimes where he wanted it to go. Usually he's someone who likes people sort of in a Lincoln kind of way. He likes different points of view arguing with each other. Biden is like that as well. But the direct contact he had with his own members was something I had not seen before. It's something members of Congress think they're going to get with the president, but they never get it. And Trump, it was true then, and it's true now, that he is more available in that way than a president I've seen in recent times.
You know, his public persona is he does all this taunting. He acts tough on the public stage. What are those private conversations like? Is he schmoozing? Is he?
Yeah, he is seen as I think more of a schmoozer, more of a open question asker, versus when we see him on the stump, this is what we're going to do. This is my plan. He might not describe it, but he'll have a bold goal, you know, like, you know, we will take over the universe, you know, so, something like that. You know, he'll have some kind of very clear and bold
only I can
item.
take over the
right,
universe.
something like that, right. But behind the scenes, my impression of the many people have described, many phone calls with him in big moments and small moments, it's more like, what do you think? Should we take over the universe? You know, I'm thinking about it. You know, what do you hear about that? And it's a very different, he is more of, for those who are golfers, in my mind, he's more of that kind of golfer in private, more of a kind of, we're just having a conversation, you know, we're talking, and very likable for his side, for people who agree with him. He's much more likable, he's not as bombastic. He can turn on a switch, though. He can quickly express anger in a meeting if he's not getting what he wants.
So how do you do this job? You've got 435 members on the House.
430 right now, but yeah.
430,
Yep.
Right, exactly. A lot of vacancies, and plus 100 over on the Senate side.
Correct, yep.
Swarms of other reporters covering this, trying to figure it out.
Right.
You've got colleagues 16 blocks away who follow one person.
Yes. With teams, yeah.
Teams
and Laura,
of people,
we've
right.
got a small team over there as well, yeah.
And a lot of the action is back and forth down Pennsylvania Avenue. So how does it work? What is a day like? Who are you talking to? How are you piecing the story together?
I feel bad. I always feel I love it when I talk about myself. So I hope I'll try and keep it short. I hope this is interesting. Okay. All right. It is challenging. My email is a nightmare because I am getting emails from hundreds of congressional offices. Every attempt I have to organize somehow causes other problems. My cell phone is the same. It's constantly getting pinged. You know, I think there's not a lot of sleep. There's a lot of 1 a.m., 2 a.m., 3 a.m. nights. I am shocked. My high school self would be shocked that I'm still at this point in my career doing all-nighters, but I am because I like to read the bills. I like to do that. I like to I'd like to do a lot of homework, but it is a constant. I guess the way I'd best put it is it's a lot of hours, but I'm lucky because I love it, and it's a matter of making choices. It's a constant matter of which sources am I going to call to make sure I'm not missing something. It's a constant feel for the building in Congress, a feel for where are the possible stories, and I'm always trying to get us stories that you don't see elsewhere. Everyone wants to do that, of course, but it's a very difficult balancing act in terms of the sourcing because you are trying to stay on top of everything. It's difficult.
And just even some of the stories you told before just now, personalities matter, things people say matter.
And it matters what I say too. The sources need to know that I'm also genuine, you know, and I will tell when I'm meeting a source for the first time, I will always say, I don't ambush. You know, if I am doing a story about you, you know, it may be critical. You're going to know it. You know, I'm not going to trick you into an answer. I'm going to ask you what I want to ask you. And that's helped me a lot because there's so much mistrust.
So you're talking to lots of these people and you're getting a sense of how they're reacting to things. There are moods, there are psychologies up there. How would you describe the psychology right now?
I love it. I ask members that question myself. The cycles of grief in Congress, something like that.
Denial, depression.
Right. I think 2021 was to say it was a difficult year for Congress does not do it justice. It was a year where members of Congress were raw in a way after January 6th that I had never seen. The emotions and the anger at each other was very raw, and that it was a very 1850s kind of year where we were seeing behind the scenes fistfights. We were seeing behind the scenes really ugly remarks that some of us who'd been there a while were worried that it was going to get much worse and there could be violence on the House floor. There almost was between members overnight after January 6th as well. I was one of the few people who saw that. So it was a raw time where members who used to work with each other in a bipartisan way, for example, co-sponsoring a very simple bill, suddenly the Democrats would say, I can't even be on the bill with you anymore because, for example, a member who had voted to object to the certification of the electoral count in 2021. So, we covered that story and we said, this is what's happening. It was incredibly raw, incredibly anger. A lot of Democrats were, and I had experience with them during January 6th, were kind of relating to me, having been there and telling me their feelings, and they were deep and angry and unlike what I'd heard from members of Congress before. Republicans the same way. So if you fast forward, then I think last year also we had the issue of the Republican mess. And I think to some degree that allowed Democrats to find their long-term footing again and not be still in the moment of January 6th as much. It's still a part of the mood on Capitol Hill. But the way I would convey the mood now that we have the speaker and that vast majorities passed a major bill, is there is some very thin scar tissue starting to move over the mood of Congress, but it could certainly be dislodged at any time. It's a very fragile time up there, and I think that the next direction is not clear.
I'm sure everybody on the Hill is looking ahead to the November elections, both for their own re-election. Either house, both houses could swing in the other direction.
And some primaries, by the way.
And there are primaries
Speaking
happening.
of local interest, yes.
Absolutely. And then there's the presidential election, which would obviously dramatically affect not just the country, but the Hill, right?
Yes,
They're all wondering,
Yes.
is it going to be a second Trump term or a second Biden term?
Yeah.
Are they talking about the elections right now, or is that front and center?
Yes, yeah. I mean, the presidential elections, to be honest, are front and center every year, but no more than in an election year.
And how much, you and I have talked about, and we at the Miller Center have been looking at how presidents act more and more unilaterally, partly because of congressional dysfunction. Are they focused on that? Are they focused on what the next president would do, whether it's Biden or Trump, using the power of the pen and the phone, as Obama described it?
There are some members, I would say the more veteran members, especially in the Senate, are focused on that. They're very concerned because obviously we've seen just more and more executive use of power, but it's not something that you hear a lot. I don't know, what do you think that's a big conversation now? I know it's...
I don't know. People who study the presidency are looking at, on the Biden side, things he's done, say, with student loans or marijuana is the latest. Just purely by executive action.
Well, I mean, former President Trump, tried to ban massive categories of people based on religion and ethnicity from country to country.
And the whole new potential to reform the civil service, going back to Chester Arthur, right? Taking the idea that civil servants could be dismissed, Schedule F and all of that.
They can be that everyone can have a political litmus test potentially, be a civil service, which is that we have to pay so much attention that I mentioned that on the show last night.
So people, we're all looking at that, but I don't know if members of Congress are as concerned about that.
They are concerned, but I think as I talk about this scar tissue in Congress, and I mentioned to the Lehrer family as well walking in, I think there's a moment that Congress has exhausted itself. And I think there is a bit of a defeatist stripe, if I'm being honest, about the way members of Congress see that, executive power versus legislative power battle. They just feel like every attempt that a few members make to try and push legislation that will rebalance things, it fails. War powers is a great example. We haven't really seen, we've seen a little bit of action on war powers, but nothing really significant in terms of Congress flexing its power to declare war. So I think there's a real defeatist idea. Members are exhausted, and to some degree, for the moment, they've kind of given up, but they're still concerned.
I'm going to ask you one more question, and then we're going to bring in some students to ask you questions. And if we have time, we'll take some questions from the audience, both
I'm going to speed it up
online
then.
and here.
All right.
We can go until 12:15. The Lehrer Lecture buys us an extra 15 minutes.
Excellent.
So I guess my last question is, you've been at this for a while. You've covered campaigns. You're covering this coming campaign. You're covering Congress. It's not the broad open-ended question, is our democracy failing? But are there things that you think we should be focused on to move us in the right direction? If this has been going back from January 6th forward, turbulent doesn't catch it, violent, divided,
Right.
deeply divided and hostile and angry time. How do we turn that around? Can we turn it around?
What a good question. I think a lot about why it is that so many Americans hold views that we know don't correspond with the facts. And I'm not just talking about one party, but often there's just such a drive right now that we've seen in politicians for forever, where you find the evidence that supports what's politically expedient for you. I think now in this tribal world, Americans are kind of like sports fans, just trying to find something that backs up their worldview, and they don't look much more deeply. They don't want to look more deeply to see if it's right. There's also this something in the water where Americans want to be angry. They want to express anger in general, and there's a kind of righteousness streak in America right now, which obviously can help our country when we're in crisis. But right now, that is part of the crisis. That is the crisis. So I guess if I could change anything, I would just kind of want more of a deep breath, more oxygen in the air for everyone, more of people kind of looking at each other with a deep breath, even though they hold different views. I think a little bit about the Salem witch trials, to be honest, and why is it that that group of obviously smart, hardworking people came to hold a view that was so counter to reality and obviously so dangerous and deadly in that case? It's not a complete comparison, but I think about that. Like, how does that sort of thing happen? How does a mob mentality happen? I think that's it. I think we have a mob mentality right now that worries me, and I don't have the answer yet, but I would like just a collective more oxygen.
So we now take on what I refer to as the Woodruff moment. Judy, when she came for the first Lehrer Lecture, said, I want to have students involved. Can we bring students into this? And what we did was turn to our students. We don't issue degrees here at the Miller Center, as you all know, but we do have a number of student opportunities. We provide some internships, and by providing internships, the interns provide us with enormous hard work and content. We engage with student groups. So we've selected 4. I'll introduce each, and they'll each ask a question, and then if we have time, we'll take a few more. So I'm going to start with my intern. Liv Abbey is a 4th-year undergraduate. She's double majoring in public policy and leadership and in economics. She was the Anselmi family intern here in the last year, including helping prepare the American Presidency Conference. So Liv, you're up.
Well, thank you so much for being here. My question pertains to, obviously a lot of public trust is failing in Congress, partially due to the turmoil, but polls show that constituents also feel like Congress just isn't representing them and doesn't care about them anymore and has more allegiance to parties or maybe even the tribes you talked about. Mm-hmm. Do you feel like seeing the day-to-day of Congress, this is true, and whether it is or not, is this like public opinion actually significant to how Congress operates?
Public opinion is significant to how Congress operates, absolutely. But the thing to keep in mind is it's not national public opinion. It is usually the public opinion, not only in their congressional district, but usually the public opinion of their own party in their own congressional district. So it takes a lot for public opinion outside of what these members already know to break through. I do think that there has been a lot of thought about what's going on in Israel in Congress right now in a way I haven't seen before. It hasn't changed how Congress has acted. I don't know how it would change that, but I think that when you see larger movements pop up across the country, Congress does take notice. The Tea Party movement's another example of that too, which you could say led straight to Donald Trump. That's a good question. Yeah.
Next is Zoe Brooks. Zoe's a second-year undergrad. She's majoring in media studies. She is a Wallentus Scholar here at UVA, which is a really new, important undertaking for the university, as well as being an Eccles Scholar. And she's the news director at the multimedia student outlet WUVA, which was a radio station when I was here, and I was a DJ at WUVA. So I'm delighted to have another WUVA student here asking our next question.
Hi, thank you so much for coming. My question is, with the recent surge in student protests across the country on college campuses, how do you think that the presidential candidates as well as lawmakers are shifting to gear towards young voters, especially as a lot of us are voting for the first time in presidential elections? So do you think there's like a genuine shift in prioritizing what young voters have to say, or do you think it's kind of that little survival government kind of mindset and like trying to get reelected once that time comes?
Great question, Zoe, and congratulations on your scholarship and news director. It's great. It's a good question about whether the presidential candidates have shifted as we've seen these campus protests. And I'm interested to understand what's going on here at UVA. I looked at the newspaper. I wasn't seeing as much as we've seen other places. But my answer is that the pressure is on President Biden on this issue. He has, we've seen, including in our poll this week, and just anecdotally, we've seen there is less love of him by some core base groups, including young voters and voters of color. And for him, that's particularly a problem in the state of Michigan, with a big Muslim population that has backed President Biden before, now no longer sees him the same way. So for Biden, he's navigating his own needle to thread politically here. I don't think it has changed his policy yet. It has changed some of the messaging of the White House about it. They try to get out the idea that they are telling Israel that it needs to change what it's doing. They're telling Israel it needs to pay more attention to civilians. It's telling Israel we're not happy with this or that. Or they're finding human rights violations by different parts of the Israeli military. But the policy writ large has not yet changed. But he's in a difficult position over it, and the Republicans know it. So that's why you see Speaker Johnson kind of stepping up on this issue. They want to be seen as the defenders of Israel. They want to be seen as the ones who have a clear policy here. I think this is playing out in real time. So it's the right question, and we're not quite sure where it's going to go yet.
Great, thank you. And thank you, Zoe. Jared Cooper is a fourth year. Majoring in government, my major. He's a writer for the Virginia Undergraduate Law Review and a co-host of Bipartisan, which is a student-run podcast that seeks to build consensus across the aisle and encourage healthy political dialogue. Jared, welcome, and you're on.
Well, first I have to say thank you again for taking the time to visit us this morning. And my question has to pertain to, I guess, the dysfunction in Congress.
Okay.
We used to see a long time ago, when America was first becoming a world power, we used to have great debates on the Senate floor. We used to have moments where great minds would come together and collide, and then it seemed to kind of dissipate. But now, this dysfunction, do you feel that it is somewhat a sign of democracy working? I mean, even if it is a bit out there, we're at least seeing people go on the floor and say things and try to advocate for their constituents. Can we view it as a positive?
What a great question. I love it. Hey, hey. Woohoo. I love it. Let's hear it for our Democratic mess. That's right. It's true. It's true, though. I think that's right. I think that there is something to be said for exactly what you're putting out there. I think what is Winston Churchill's great quote, democracy is the best system once you've tried all the rest. Mm-hmm. I think that another way I put it, I talk about the pendulum, but I think our Constitution is being tested, being dramatically tested, has been, and probably will be again soon. But it is holding up, is the point. and I think that one reason it's holding up is because of, and this isn't just to blow smoke, but it's because of engaged Americans like all of us in this room, who are paying attention, and who are watching, and that's how democracy works. We are all invested in this country in the same way. And I think dysfunction, Congress was actually designed to be dysfunctional. It was designed to make changes hard, and I think then what's happening is politicians are trying to use that sometimes to get their own power, but there is a really good argument here for saying parts of this dysfunction are showing that democracy can stand, and this is how it goes. Yeah. Thanks, Jared.
Thank you, Jared. A stitch of optimism.
If you run for him, if you're going to run for office, talk to all the people in this room. Okay?
Jared will be taking donations.
Good, exactly.
Finally, Susanna Karatian is a third year. She's an intern here at the Miller Center, and I get to work with Susanna. I get to do what she tells me to do. She's double majoring in foreign affairs and religious studies, and she's been really helping us out on something that, for loyal and regular Miller Center followers, you've seen our work on Ukraine, either the events we've done here or the webinars we've done. Susanna supports our weekly meeting of scholars and faculty and experts on the Ukraine war room. So, Susanna, take it away.
Hi, thank you so much for being here. So I was just wondering, in light of the recent generational divides which we are seeing and the partisan divides which you mentioned among the public, specifically on foreign policy issues, I was wondering how we should consider the recent bundling of Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan in the foreign aid package and its effects going forward.
So the question is, how would I consider the effects of that bill?
Yes, on public opinion. And,
on public opinion.
Yeah, and American voters.
I would love to say that, and I don't want to sound cynical. I would love to say major legislation in Congress. Everyone in America thinks about it. Especially something that is a spending bill, which is more complicated than people might realize when you get into where that money's going. And, I think that the details of, my guess is the details of the bill are having less of an effect on the American public than is the fact that they were able to pass a bill. But I think that the fact that they passed, there's a lot of different numbers, but I say $15 billion for Israel without any conditions, I think that will come up again. But I think right now, we're in a moment of everyone calm down for a second in Congress.
I have a fun fact follow-up on that. The fun fact is that we learned that you studied Russian.
Yes.
Back along the way. So as you're watching this unfold, just give us your personal take on it. How much have you continued to follow things in Russia?
In Russia.
How invested were you in the policy around Ukraine? Yeah. And as the bill came forward with the fits and starts, including whether or not President Trump was going to actively campaign against the bill. He appeared that he was, but then he seemed to back off and give some space. Just tell us your personal story through that.
Former President Trump loves it both ways. He loves everyone to hear what they want to hear. And I think Ukraine was sort of a case like that. He still has left himself room to oppose future aid easily. As far as Russia goes, it's a long story why I ended up in Russia, but I did have, I'm very passionate about that country and about the people there. Incredible people, incredible history. I was very fortunate to spend time there. It was a long time ago. It was during the Boris Yeltsin years, which was helpful because he spoke so slowly that I could translate every word he spoke. So it was wonderful. But as far as following the Ukraine, I really have followed it more as an American and as a congressional reporter for a number of reasons, but one of them is that sadly, my host family, who I love very much in Russia, I have not been in touch with them for years. It has been a hostile environment. It has not been good for Russians to have a lot of contact necessarily with Americans, much less American reporters. And so, out of, honestly, love for them, I've kind of stayed away from their orbit, which has been hard, but all I can do is hope for better and more free times in that country.
Are they in Moscow?
I don't need to say, but
Okay.
yeah.
Got it. Okay, we have time for a few more questions from the audience. Please wait for the microphone so that our friends online can hear your question. Please ask a question, not a statement with a question mark at the end.
Not a statement. Is this on?
It's on.
I just want to make a statement and then I'll ask my question.
You get the microphone.
I'd like to see more reporters call us what we are, a federalist republic. And that's the United States of America is not really a democracy. It's a federalist republic. Ben Franklin said to the lady who asked him, what do we have? And he said, a republic if you can keep it. Yeah. So I'd like to see more people, especially on the news reporters, say it's a federalist republic.
Okay.
That would be so great to hear that on TV.
Okay.
I mean,
sure.
And so
You're going to the source. Great. I hear you.
So my question is this. I don't think we have discussed what's going on our border at all today. And how does the Congress feel about that, and what are they going to do about it? So that's my question.
Can I ask the follow-up question to that? Because it goes to presidential power and congressional power. Congress appeared to have a bill that appeared to have everything that Republicans wanted in the bill, and Republicans rejected the bill with former President Trump saying, it's not good enough. Elect me so that I can just do it myself by executive action.
Yeah.
Am I capturing that right?
That's right.
And if I'm not, what can Congress?
That's not exactly what happened, though, because there were they said, well, we can allow 5,000 people in per day, and if Joe Biden wants more, we'll have more, and that's what they rejected.
If I may. If I may, sir. Yes. No, I appreciate it. Yeah. Obviously, this is a great example of this is a massive issue in our country. We need to spend as much time as we can on it. My colleague Amno was at the border not long ago. That concept, the Langford-Sinema-Murphy bill, the reason I kind of feel like this is I lost so many hours of sleep over that bill. I read it. I know that bill back and forth. I know what it does and doesn't do. There are some things said about it that are not accurate. Anyway, it was a complicated bill, but it was a very great example of real compromise. Democrats really went farther than they ever had before in reforming our immigration system in a way they weren't entirely comfortable with, and changing border security in a way that they would never have done before. It was really conservatives' best chance at a conservative bill in a long time. But you could say on a policy standpoint, there were Republicans who felt that it didn't go far enough. Absolutely, that was legitimate. But my reporting is, and I have this locked down, Republicans and the Trump campaign wanted the political issue. They did not want a border solution to be deployed now. They wanted more time so that he could get in office, and so that they could get more conservative wins, but also so that they could get this issue after a year of chaos, a year of problems for Republicans, that they could try and push this issue. And you'll hear more about it. This whole time, Trump loves to talk about it. He talked about the economy yesterday, but that's what happened.
Can I ask a related question on whether or not there's any conversation on Capitol Hill about this? We've also seen data indicating that the rising number of immigrants we've had have actually fueled economic growth.
Right.
And we're also hearing that we have labor shortages in this country. So why are we talking about limiting immigration?
Right.
And I mean that as a genuine question, because it appears that there is a crisis. People appear to be coming over in an unregulated way, and yet data might indicate that maybe that's not a bad thing.
I haven't talked yet today about the logical disconnects of covering the Capitol. But they are many, and they are daily. And this is one, I've asked this same question to Republicans who've said we need to limit not just illegal immigration, but legal immigration. I've said, wait, we've got a labor shortage problem, we've got a birth rate problem. This country has always been fueled by immigration, which they will also admit, almost everyone, but maybe 3 or 4 members of the Capitol being here solely based on immigrants. But there is a logical disconnect there. They will say, I think maybe the answer someone in that camp would give would be something like, yes, but we think it's a bigger problem that our laws are broken, and we need to address the broken laws first, and then we can talk about our labor shortage. I think that's what they would say.
Got it. Fred Scott in the second row. Fred, please wait for the microphone.
Thanks for coming. This conversation was contemplated 20 minutes after we tucked Jim away in his funeral on the way home. And the idea was to talk about the state of the media. And I'd like to ask you if you have any thoughts about how various networks, teams, reporters, people, all the folks that gather the news and the kind of questions they ask and who they ask them to and how they frame their questions, to what extent does that greater group bear any responsibility for, or I guess that's the right word, to what we are seeing today? I'm not trying to tell you what I answer. I have some thoughts, but I don't think we have covered that today. Would you mind trying to take a stab at it?
Happy to. Yeah, and very good to meet you, Fred. Thank you for the question. You know, I think, and again, there's a vast array of opinions on this, so I can only speak for myself. But I think that the media has deep responsibility for the tone in this country. I don't think we are where the tone comes from, but I think the media is where the tone can easily become exaggerated, elevated, escalated. And unfortunately, I think that there are two things. One is that it is easy to, sometimes I think of it as either sugar or like cocaine, that, you know, it's very easy to get viewership over emotion. You know, we've seen so many journalists, especially in broadcast, play to that. You know, I think not consciously, sometimes consciously, mostly not consciously, but they're trying to get more attention. And we see on social media, with the short lifespan of anything on social media, it's all about that sort of quick emotional high reaction and counter reaction. That I think the media has gotten hooked into and has also made worse in general. And I think that goes back to what I was saying, why I'm so happy at NewsHour, that we really have a mooring, and we are not perfect, but where we are trying to just, I put it this way, we're not trying to raise people's blood pressure, which is what I think has happened maybe unintentionally with a lot of other media. You know, there's so much shouting, the media feels like we're going to shout too. There's been a move back from that, I think, in the last couple of years. We've seen at CNN, they've blatantly said we're going to try to move back from this sort of us versus them, us versus the Trump folks kind of work. And of course, obviously, there's something to be said for just calling out what we see as truth and not truth. So CNN operates on many levels. But I do think it's something we have to think about every day. I think it is part of the problem. I can't deny it.
And you split your time, as you mentioned before, covering the Hill and now covering the Trump campaign.
Yeah. Yep.
In an election season, how do you do that? Elections are so much driven by emotion.
Yes.
And both campaigns' efforts to mobilize emotion.
I mean, I have a strange skill set in that you know, my heart rate does go up when I'm being attacked, but I am able to somehow get through it and remind myself that I'm here to cover something. And so I think that, you know, I've been in many tricky situations, going, you know, way back with the Tea Party movement, where there were a bunch of protesters that were they were thinking about trying to push the CNN bus over at one point, you know, and I'm fortunate that I just really believe in talking to people on a human level, and that you can de-escalate, and that's helped me a lot of places, including at the White House Correspondents' Dinner on Saturday, where you know, there were protests about Israel and very, very aggressive protesters, you know, in my face, you know, and I just, you know, I had to. Their anger is coming from somewhere, you know, and I want to understand that, you know. I'm not trying to challenge it. I don't need to get angry. I don't need to, you know, but. So I think that we're going to have more of that, but I think, how do I do it? I don't know. You know, I think I was lucky. I had two very brilliant parents. who I loved. They had a very rough marriage, and I think maybe that taught me something about, like loving everyone, listening to everyone, just kind of, you're not in the fight. You might feel like you're in the fight. Just let's just let it, we're just going to stand back.
You're the second reporter that's talked about that here at the Miller Center. Yeah, John Dickerson said the same thing at an event last year.
That's funny.
I think you have time for one more question.
Okay, good. Who's it going to be? We know much. Oh, we got other good. Oh, there we go.
There in the back on the right.
Again, thank you very much for coming. As a preface to this, I think there was a political scientist who once said that Americans were well unsuited for crises because we don't pay attention to the causes that lead to a crisis. We want an immediate solution, and then we forget about it as soon as we think the crisis is over. And on that, and about the border security bill, I saw a photo exhibit recently, and a person who was on the border said, well, one of the reasons a wall won't really work is because you can't build it right on the border. And American law is, once you step on American soil, you can apply for amnesty. And then what do you do with the people for the amnesty? And so where the question is leading, with the complexity of so many of our issues, what can be done, if anything, in terms of how press can approach these in a way that, for people who don't want to get into who don't want to read the entirety of the bill on the border issue, how can the press communicate these issues effectively to people?
I don't think you meant this as a softball, but I think we're doing that. I think we're doing that at NewsHour, and I think I can only speak to how we do what we do, and I think we. There's an old phrase that was popular at NewsHour when I came in, and I think had been, perhaps Jim or Robin had said, is what questions do we want to ask and who can answer them? So sometimes I think media starts with who's the best guest, who's getting a lot of attention right now? And I think it's better to start with what are the questions that we want to ask and then who can answer them. And as far as like all the complicated stuff and helping people understand, I think we really spend a lot of times, when you see me on set with Amna or Jeff, and it's just me and you'll see some graphics, you might see some sound bites, and I'll have, on a good day, I'll have, which is more than my colleagues at other outlets, I'll have 5-6 minutes. Last night I got 7 minutes. It was complicated. Occasionally I'll have 2 or 3. Those are tricky days. But it might look simple.
Whereas your counterparts have 30 seconds or
they might, or 1 minute, 2 minutes, yeah. So it's a blessing. I think people need more time to get a little bit more depth. And I think that when I'm doing that, it's actually more complicated than it seems. We've spent hours and hours figuring out which exact graphic can explain this complicated thing with a little depth, but without, I always tell my team, I said, I just don't want to hurt people's heads. I want to add to the brain, not make the brain hurt, and I think that you really have to just be ready to do the work. And if I'm going to have a busy day, this goes back to the what are my days like, if I know it's a crazy day and I know I have a difficult segment like that to explain something tricky on the news the next night, I will stay up 3, 4 in the morning plotting it out, the choreography and what points I'm going to make and which ones I can't make. And that's heartbreaking. There's a lot of good reporting that I'm not going to get to. But it's about making choices and it's about asking the right questions, I think. Does that help? Something. We can talk more. I mean, it's hard for me to answer that because I think we do a great job at NewsHour. I really do. And other news outlets have their own ways of doing things, but I just think our focus on both the big picture and substance beneath is the way to go.
Well, let me just say, as a NewsHour junkie, you're not going to get any pushback on that from me. We are all so appreciative of the work that all of you do, that Jim and Robin's passing this year as well, really laid a foundation, but your generation is carrying it forward in a way that makes us regular viewers.
Well, thank you.
And we're so thankful. and thankful for you in particular, Lisa. Your coverage has been just terrific
appreciate
during an incredible time. It's an institution that, though we study the presidency here, we have to study Congress as well alongside of it. And your coverage has just been exceptional. So thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us.
Thank you. And briefly, you know, reporters, we all like to get in the last word, but I just want to say I've done many, many events, and the Miller Center working with you has been so smooth and just such a great experience. And Mike and Rob on the tech team, I don't know if you guys always get props, but thank you. And I just want to...
And Kevin and Dan up in the crow's nest.
And Kevin and Dan up in the crow's nest, seriously. It really, you know, I know that you all see kind of the view from the audience, but the view from behind the scenes is of just such a well-run organization. It's been a pleasure.
Well, thank you. I am going to get the last word because a few other people to thank. So again, thanks to our governing council and foundation board for all the work you do for the Miller Center, not just coming to this year's meeting. To the Lehrer family, thank you for sharing Jim with us. And to the other supporters of the Lehrer Lectureship, this is really an important event that we do every year. We honor Jim's legacy in journalism and the issues he cared about, the presidency, our political institutions, and our national dialogue. And Lisa, you've done us all proud, so thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you all.
Thank you.